So I went on a little vacation recently. Sometimes that corporate life path really weighs you down like a cement block tied to your feet in the water. The solution? A temporary break where you can basically do whatever you want. Now, did I go relax on a beach or hop on a plane to visit somewhere new? No, I stayed my ass right at home and I played video games. 5 of them to be exact, one for every day of my vacation. I'm usually a stop and smell the roses type of gamer, so I thought it would be fun to challenge myself by playing a few games in a different manner. As far as beating a game, I literally just mean doing enough to make the credits roll. I hesitate to call this speedrunning because, well, you'll see, but I'm obviously on a bit of a time crunch, and even on vacation I still had real life things to take care of, so nothing is off the table and I will be doing whatever it takes to complete them as soon as I can. The games that I picked for this challenge were slightly strategically chosen. I didn't just randomly select stuff from my Steam library, though that does sound like a fun video idea, but all 5 of these games were high up on my backlog and for one reason or another I just hadn't gotten around to playing them. This was a long and trying journey, and as we do with most stories, we're gonna start at the beginning. Technically, this challenge starts on day 0 because that's when I picked the games, but I came out swinging on day 1. I had like an outline of a plan for how I was going to complete this challenge in regards to the order I'd play the games and how long they should take me, but I figured I'd work out the semantics as I went. For now, the idea was just to blitz through each one.
That is not a plan!
It's barely a concept.
I wanted to get as much of a head start as I could, so when midnight struck, I started the first game in the lineup. I chose to start with Rollerdrome really because it didn't seem like there was anything particularly challenging about it, and I felt like it would be good to get my feet wet when it comes to semi-speedrunning. This game is pretty sick though. I'm gonna start off by saying that graphically, this is one of those weird situations where I don't know if I like the visuals. It's not ugly, but it's definitely not pretty either, and I feel like it's weird enough to put off some people. If that's you, let me tell you that the gameplay surely makes up for the strange graphics. There is a story here, but for obvious reasons, I didn't go out of my way to engage with it. The combat is where Rollerdrome really shines anyway. Each stage puts you in a stadium or battlefield full of enemies, and you start the game with only your pistols and your roller skates. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock new weapons and enemy types, and I feel like there's just enough of both of them to keep the game challenging and interesting without being overwhelming. Once you get to the later stages, you'll find that levels are much easier if you prioritize your targets and that certain weapons work better against specific enemies. These guys shoot beams that leave trails and have teleporters for whatever reason, and they will make your run so much more difficult if you don't take them out as soon as you can. Similarly, snipers who aren't nearly as bad can still interrupt your flow of combat if you leave them alone for too long. Both of these enemies are pretty easy to perfect dodge though, which gives you a temporary moment of slow-mo, infinite ammo, and bonus damage, so it might be worth leaving them alive for just a little while to take advantage of this on some of the beefier enemies. Mastering the perfect dodging was so satisfying, and that's really when I started to feel like I got the hang of the combat. The combo system is also a really important part of the combat, and it reminded me of Ollie Ollie World a little. You have to do tricks to refill your ammo, but killing the enemies is actually what increases your combo meter. So it leads to this fun and engaging balancing act where you have to make sure you're doing enough tricks to actually be able to fight, but not focusing on them so much that you lose the combo meter. I'm not a huge fan of higher weapon share and ammo pool though. I'm sure this was done to balance the game, but it just doesn't feel right to empty your grenade launcher and then switch to your pistols, which should have full ammo but are now empty. I planned on just killing my way through the game without doing any of the extra side content, but you actually need to do a portion of the challenges in a level tier to advance in the ranks. Things like obtaining collectibles, reaching a specific combo meter, and not using a weapon at all during your run all spice up the gameplay, which is good for the game, not so good for the challenge, and I would say this was the only thing that kept me from completing this with a sub 2 hour run. All in all, it wasn't too bad though. It really just came down to choosing the challenges that I thought would be easiest to progress to the next tier of stages. I will say that I saw some pretty gnarly ones, particularly completing stages with time constraints, so if you're wanting to 100% this, you've got your work cut out for you. I feel like I don't talk about soundtracks a lot when I'm reviewing games, but I definitely want to give Rollerdrome its flowers here. It sports an 80s synthwave soundtrack which surprisingly fits the game very well. You might expect a more punk rock setlist, but I'm glad they took this route. I thought I was only going to play through about half of this on the first night, but I pre-gamed with a nap earlier that day and figured I didn't need to have a sleep schedule while I was on vacation, so in right under 3.5 hours and in only 2 sessions, Rollerdrome was finished. I was pretty tired after seeing the credits roll, so I went to sleep at around 4 AM to get ready for the actual first day of the challenge. I woke up the next morning feeling confident knowing that I was already a bit ahead of schedule. I drank my morning coffee, watched an episode of Lost, and got to work as soon as the caffeine hit my system. Next up was Tokyo 42, and I did not like this one, which kind of hurt because I love the idea here. An isometric Hitman Hotline Miami style game, but in execution this is all style and no substance. Let's start off with the style because you guys know I like to start off with the positives. Tokyo 42 looks really nice. The isometric low poly art style is right up my alley in terms of art direction. I always thought this game looked sick from a distance and I didn't really understand the mostly positive review standing on Steam until I played it. So you know how I was super excited about that isometric perspective? Well, that actually causes a lot of problems during gameplay, specifically in combat. Part of the reason why Hotline Miami can be so tough but still seem fair is because of that top-down perspective, you always have vision of the enemies and your surroundings to plan around. Now, imagine if on top of all of the chaos in that game, you also had to manage switching perspectives and accounting for different elevation levels. So you also have to worry about people raining down bullets and grenades on you from positions where you can't even fight back. It's all just so chaotic and too much to handle when you've got 20 goons shooting at you. I died so many times to people that weren't even on my screen or that I had no way of fighting against. The different height levels are also pretty inconsistent, like right here I'm hiding behind cover above someone. Why were they able to shoot me? And for all of those downsides, I think a simple dodge roll would have done a lot to aid the combat here. I get the feeling that you're actually supposed to stealth most of these missions, but there aren't any silenced ranged weapons and the regular difficulty is a one-shot, so you have fun with that, I'm not messing with it. I played on easy, which gave me a bit of armor, but this still wasn't a cakewalk. I found the most success with kind of a hybrid playstyle, stealthing until I got to a checkpoint and then going Rambo once I didn't have to worry about dying and starting over from the beginning. Tokyo 42 also doesn't control the best. There's a mission where you get a bike and you're supposed to do a little drive-by, and this should have been dope, but the motorcycle controls so poorly I didn't ever touch it again after I beat the mission, even though it's accessible in the open world. There are collectibles and side missions to find and take part in around the city, but again, time crunch, and I wasn't even particularly feeling this one, so I exclusively stuck to the main missions. Design-wise, other than the poor controls, there weren't any big roadblocks keeping me from running through this, but the unfun nature of the game posed a unique obstacle to the challenge where I lost time simply due to not wanting to play the game. Rollerdrome had a few frustrating moments, but overall I enjoyed the game enough to beat it in just 2 sessions. This took nearly the whole day because I was only able to digest it in smaller periods. I'm hoping that this doesn't become an ongoing issue with the later games, but in about 4 hours, nearly 3 hours sooner than how long to be estimated, I was happy to be done with Tokyo 42. Even though I had a poor experience with the last game, I was still feeling pretty good going into day 2. We were still a game ahead of schedule, so I was thinking there was a possibility to maybe even beat the challenge a little early, but game number 3 had different plans. Spelunky 2 was purposely chosen to be a monkey wrench in the equation. The Spelunky games are roguelikes, so while they can technically be beaten within an hour, it takes much more time to get good and or lucky enough to actually beat them. I thought it would be interesting to see how the numbers play out here, and I also thought it would be funny if I somehow beat it on my first try, but this was attempt number 1.
Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out!
Yeah, this is gonna be a rough one. It's also worth mentioning that I have played Spelunky 2 before, but I never made it past the second biome, so I felt like it was new enough to include in the run. One of my favorite things about the Spelunky games is that they're much more about building good habits and making good decisions than mechanical skills like most roguelikes tend to be. There are definitely some tricky pro-gamer things you can do like whipping arrow traps and Goomba stomping enemies to avoid fall damage, but proper resource management and good decision making is what wins Spelunky runs. The strat here was just to survive. I'm not doing any alternate true endings or killing any shopkeepers, just get to the door at the end of the level. Seems simple, right?
It's false. No way. Not this time.
You are always one fall, one trap, one bad decision away from starting over, no matter how good your run is. There are a literal ton of different interactions between enemies, items, and the environment, and you will die to so much shit that you'd have never even thought of. Like, here I used the boomerang to kill Papa Spider and get some glue, but the boomerang carried his ass right back to me for an instant restart. I played Spelunky 2 off and on all day on day 2, but I started to get worried when I checked the Steam library and saw that I had added 4 hours to the total playtime, but I wasn't really making any progress. I was still consistently dying in the first area. I expected there to be a bit of a learning curve and adjusting period, but not like this. I mean, I was pretty decent at Spelunky 1, at least good enough to complete true ending runs, so I was a little disheartened by the lack of progress, and I actually started game number 5 before I went to sleep. Yes, I know I skipped 4, it'll all make sense in a little. I'm not gonna spoil what the game is, but where you can kind of hit a wall in Spelunky, game 5 is one where you're always making progress, and I wanted to feel like I accomplished something before I went to bed that night. Day 3 was interesting. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to play games all day like I had been because I had a new desk coming in the mail, and I also made plans to hang out with a friend that day. The plans ended up falling through, but the desk still took forever to set up. Shout out to my boy Zach for helping me mount my monitors, and here is the new setup. The little time I did have to play games this day was entirely dedicated to Spelunky. I thought about my approach a little, and I felt like bouncing back and forth between this and Game 5 would have done more harm than good. Yeah, it would have kept things fresh, but I thought it would have negatively impacted my decision making in Spelunky and my mechanical skills in Game 5, so I shelved it for now. I think the break did help me as I was finally starting to make it out of the dwelling, but I was still not where I wanted to be in terms of run length, so it was time to reevaluate some things. The branching pass at the end of the dwelling is a completely new thing in Spelunky 2, and up until now I defaulted to taking the jungle just because that was the second level in Spelunky 1. But after looking around on the internet, I found that apparently it's widely considered to be the tougher path, so the first big change was going to Volcana instead. Here I had to worry about instantly dying to lava, but the enemies and traps were much more manageable. This proved to be fruitful as I made it to Olmec and the Tide Pool for the first time on day 3. I was a little surprised to see Olmec this early since he was the final boss of the base game in Spelunky 1, and while this was a nice accomplishment, it was also a little scary since it made me realize I didn't even know how much game I had left to complete a run. I did not have time to fully learn the ins and outs of even 2 more biomes, so this led me to the second big change: shortcuts. Now hear me out, I know what you're thinking. And I agree, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I still have to go out of my way to unlock them, and while shortcuts are nice, you miss out on potential gold and items from the earlier floors that you skip, so there's a bit of give and take there. I spent a couple hours unlocking the shortcuts and another couple hours familiarizing myself with my new starting point, the Tide Pool, before calling it a night and preparing for day 4. I'm gonna be honest, this was the first day in the challenge when I woke up not feeling confident that I would complete it. I just knew that I'd have beaten Spelunky by now, and I went from being a game ahead of pace to now only having 2 days left and 3 games to beat. But we had a solid plan and I wasn't gonna give up quite yet. At this point, all there was left to do was grind until I got a good run. I made it to the Ice Caves and Neon Babylon in only a few hours with the new strat, but the limited resources were proving to be an issue. I had to play riskier without the aid of bombs, ropes, and some quality of life items from the earlier stages, which led to a lot of unnecessary deaths. But knowing that I didn't have to start all the way over after dying was a huge weight lifted off of my chest. The limited resources also prompted me to be a bit preemptive when it came to beating the final boss. I didn't really know what to expect from it, but I found this little tip that can basically guarantee you a shotgun, which couldn't hurt. A few hours went by and I finally had a blessed run. I went into the final boss for the first time with 12 health, a shotgun, some ropes, and a dream. First impressions of the final boss?
She kinda bad though.
I'm not gonna lie, I was shaking in my boots this entire fight. Again, I can't stress enough, it only takes one mistake to end the run. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like these pink bubble things would have instantly killed me. But with some good rope placement and patience, after 16 hours, I beat Spelunky 2. This run was also, maybe not so coincidentally, the first time I used my new standing desk. So let this be a lesson that sometimes you just need to stretch your legs. But the time for celebration and relaxation was fleeting. I still had 2 games to beat, so I ate some lunch, stepped outside for a little fresh air, and got right back to business. Remember how I didn't want to spoil Game 5 earlier in the video? Well, that was then, this is now, and I'm changing the rules. Game 5 is Celeste.
Spoilers.
And it's important that you know that because I want you to know how wrinkly my brain was during this part of the challenge. I knew I would need a break between Spelunky and Celeste, so I chose a nice little casual game as a sort of palate cleanser. When I was looking through my library choosing games for this challenge, I made it a point not to choose games like this that are purposely condensed experiences. After all, it wouldn't be much of a challenge if I could easily beat all 5 games within day 1, right? But I allowed myself one because I've been meaning to play through this and I felt like I deserved a break after Spelunky. Casual games have really been growing on me within the past year. When you go from fighting to the death to saving the world to tactically maneuvering around a battlefield, it all starts to get a bit exhausting. So I find myself looking for games like this to use as sort of a reset to break up the more intense ones. There's also something to be said about a game that you can fully complete in an afternoon. Yeah, I beat Rollerdrome and Tokyo 42 in a day, but if I was playing through them normally, they probably would have taken at least a week with my normal schedule. A short hike took me, spoilers, less than 2 hours to beat, and that was with me doing a majority of the side content. The best way that I can describe this is a nice, meaty adventure game, but compacted. Like, there are all the elements of a 30 to 40 hour adventure game here. You'll find new equipment, unlock new shortcuts, find side quests, and a handful of interesting characters on your way up the mountain. I went into this expecting it to be pretty linear, so this was all a pleasant surprise. One of my favorite moments in this game was meeting this guy that was paranoid about getting caught without his camping license, and when you ask what happened, he says a fish ate it. You expect this to be just sort of a one-off joke, but there I was, fishing near the top of the mountain, and look what I found. There's also a girl that wants you to help her find her lost headband, and I found it, but I feel like it looks better on me, so I'm gonna keep this. This game is just so full of charm, and had it not been for the impending doom that is Celeste, I probably would have done absolutely everything in it. In regards to the challenge, there really wasn't anything too tough about this. Just exploring and doing the side objectives we talked about a minute ago gives you golden wings that you can use to make it further up the mountain, and you eventually get to a point where you can straight up buy them if you don't have enough to make it to the top. So as I expected, this was the easiest and quickest game of the challenge, only taking me 80 minutes to beat. It was pretty late at this point, but I was not willing to risk failing this challenge just because I was a little tired. So immediately after beating a short hike, I powered up my Switch to get back to Celeste. Remember, I played a little on day 3, but I didn't even complete an entire stage, so I still had almost the entire game ahead of me. I picked Celeste to be the send-off because I thought it would make for good content to have a notoriously difficult game be the final hurdle in the challenge. But if you've been around the channel for a while, you've also heard me talk about how embarrassingly bad I am at platformers. I'm guessing it's because after playing them pretty exclusively as a kid, I then almost entirely replaced them with shooters and other grown-up games when I became a teenager. It's such a problem and mental roadblock that despite the fact that I've been wanting to play this for years, every time I thought about starting it up, I talked myself out of it assuming that I'd have a bad experience. So I thought it would be kind of symbolic if the final push of this challenge was also an obstacle in my personal life. As corny as it sounds, a mountain of my own to climb. As expected, things started out pretty tame. The first 2 levels are just to get you used to controlling Madeline, and you really only have to worry about a few spikes here and there. I do want to mention the sick chase sequence at the end of level 2 though. But the 3rd level definitely ramps things up and is when I started to realize how much precision this game demands. The Celestial Resort is full of this black goop which really restricts your areas of movement. There are also these balls of moving goop that end up feeling like sort of a mini rhythm section that gave me some trouble. They kind of reminded me of when you're gearing up to run into some double jump ropes and you're doing a little back and forward trying to get the timing right. This is all a lot to deal with when you're just getting used to the feel of the game, and I would imagine that most players that give up do so within this area, but I've made it too far to give up on just the 3rd level, so I threw my head at the wall until I made it out of the hotel. The next stage featured heavy wind, which sucked, but not in an unfun way. One of the worst things you can do in a platformer is limit player movement for an extended period of time, but for some reason I didn't hate this, likely because of how well the sections are paced out. The summit also features these blocks that move in the direction of their arrows when you touch them, and bubbles that reset your dash mid-air. This was when I started to notice how much Celeste varies its gameplay up between stages with unique and fun gimmicks, and how much it added to my enjoyment of the game. It had gotten pretty late, or early by now, and I probably could have stopped, but I felt like I had one more level in me, so half asleep I made my way through the Mirror Temple. Its obstacles include
Advanced darkness
and red bubbles that propel you in the direction of your choosing. The ending section was also pretty tough as you have to manage carrying a big crystal while dodging whatever the this thing is. After beating the Mirror Temple, it was once again 4 AM, which apparently was my new bedtime, so for the last time of this challenge, I packed it in and called it a night. Here we are, the final stretch. At the beginning of day 5, I was back to feeling pretty good, knowing that I was almost to the finish line, but I also anticipated the final chapters of Celeste being the hardest, and I didn't have much time to waste. You know the morning routine by now, so let's get back to the gameplay. After making some pretty good progress on your way up the mountain, Madeline ends up falling, going down even further than when she started. Now, here would be a great time to insert a story of how this relates to the trials of this challenge or life in general, and how you should never give up, and insert more anime quotes here, but honestly, come here. Celeste wasn't really that hard. Don't get me wrong, there were definitely some tough sections, but as a whole, especially compared to the hell I went through in Spelunky, I was kinda coasting. As I was playing through this, I thought it was so interesting how differently the two games handle difficulty. I actually want to make a separate video about this, so I'm not going to get into specifics too much, but the main points are that Celeste is mechanically much more challenging than Spelunky, but it's also infinitely more forgiving. Sure, some rooms might take you 5 minutes to clear, and you might rack up 20 or so deaths before doing so, but you're back in the action so fast after dying playing in Celeste. And you also have peace of mind knowing that once you clear a difficult room, there's a checkpoint waiting for you in the next one. But since anything can end your run at any moment in Spelunky, which might also mean completely losing 20 minutes of progress, you're always in this heightened state, which results in some mental strain the more you play. And that's a perfect segue into Celeste's depiction and handling of declining mental health, something that it's so highly praised for. The entire reason Madeline is climbing Mount Celeste is because she suffers from depression along with panic attacks and felt like she needed to escape. Throughout the game, she talks about what depression is like for her and how she handles it, and you'll even see her have a couple panic attacks. Whenever this happens, there's this feather balancing mechanic that's used to calm her down, and I thought this was so neat. Visualizing these concepts that are generally not put at the forefront of gaming in particular is what makes Celeste's handling of mental health so masterful in my opinion. Madeline, fire name by the way, the main antagonist is literally a physical manifestation of Maddie's negativity that comes as a result of her struggling mental health, and that black goop that we talked about in the Celestial Resort is Oshiro's anxiety and feelings of inadequacy taking form. Just to give a few examples, all of this is prevalent and a big part of the game, but it doesn't ever feel preachy, something else to be commended. I also feel like this game actually cares about my mental well-being as the player. Like, there are little postcards in between stages that tell you to take breaks and not to stress too much about getting strawberries and to just overall enjoy the game. Unlike most other difficult games, it feels like the devs really want this to be accessible to everyone. Getting back to the challenge, the area that Maddie falls into is gorgeous, blending purples, greens, and blues together for such a unique aesthetic. The majority of this stage is a chase sequence boss fight with Madeline, and I just thought it was so cool to have basically an entire level dedicated to one fight. After you beat her, the two reconcile their differences and decide to work together to climb the mountain. This is also a pretty cool part of the game that has you literally make your way back up through all of the levels that you've previously beaten, each of them including snippets of their gimmicks. This part has big boss rush energy, and when you get near the top of the mountain, it turns into a trial with the tightest platforming in the game. Still, none of this was too hard, largely due to having a second dash after combining forces with Madeline. As I got closer and closer to the top of the mountain, I cannot tell you how good it felt to A, almost be done with the challenge, and B, finally conquer something that's been mentally bullying me for so long. Every checkpoint I could feel myself getting closer and closer to the top, and eventually, with the endgame timer at 5 hours and 40 minutes and a total death counter of 1187, I beat Celeste and completed the challenge. So to answer the question in the title, yes, I can beat 5 games in 5 days. My biggest takeaway from this was just to mix things up every now and then. There's not a right way to play video games, and I think a different mindset from how you usually play them can really change the experience. Will I continue to play games as quickly as possible like this? Probably not for the most part, but this challenge also showed me that maybe some games are better with a beeline to the credits. If I didn't give myself this strict timer, I probably would have suffered through Tokyo 42 for another 5 or 10 hours, but after doing the bare minimum, I feel like I've gotten what I needed out of that game. Spelunky was insanely frustrating, but I think that's purely based on the mindset I had going in. If I was playing to learn the process of how to beat the game and not specifically to beat it, a lot of my deaths probably wouldn't have been as frustrating, and I might have even beaten it faster due to lack of pressure. I feel like I missed out on some content on both Rollerdrome and A Short Hike, so I probably will go back and do more challenges and side quests in them. And Celeste, I think I actually played perfectly for myself. Going for all of the strawberries I think would have soured the experience for me, so I'm glad I took a more minimal approach and just enjoyed the story and gameplay at its core. Well, if you've made it this far, thank you. I'm gonna assume that you enjoyed the video, so don't forget to leave a like and comment so the algorithm knows to recommend it to more people. And if you really liked it, you can sub to the channel for more gaming content like this. Also, let me know how you guys feel about challenge content like this. I'm definitely down to go for a round 2, and I'm even open to suggestions for games that I play. Anyway, thank you for sticking around until the end, and I'll see you in the next one.